Awesome.
Okay, perfect. So welcome everyone to our virtual Boston Azure meetup. And we are super happy to have you all today. And we have an awesome presenter all the way from Vermont. Kyle Mitofsky is the principal software developer at Vermont Department of Health. And he has great experience with chatbots, and he's going to share that with us. I met Kyle personally a couple of times, so that's awesome. I miss meeting people all the time. Kyle is really active in tech community. He's presenting, attending different meetups and events all around. So he's a really knowledgeable, great person, and I'm sure he'll tell us awesome stuff about chatbots. So Kyle, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. Yeah, certainly we've seen each other cross paths at a lot of different tech events, and I'm involved in helping do the site stuff for Vermont Code Camp, which we have annually. And this is the first year that we're not going to be able to do it because of COVID. I love and really appreciate getting to jump into meetup groups that are virtualized, and I wouldn't have otherwise had the possibility to do. We don't have a huge Azure community, or not one that I've taken time to foster up in Burlington. So it's really nice to be able to kind of come together virtually. So this is an awesome opportunity. The self kudos I want to do. So I wrote this thing today. I've been making commits all the way up until like 5:55. We have this site that we wrote for the all of our kind of documentation. It's kind of tech bloggy, but it's for the Department of Health, and we have different articles in here that talk about how we're solving problems. And so in here today, this presentations thing is new, and what it will do is go grab this, and this is just a markdown file. We can look at. I'm really just nerding out before the presentation. This has nothing to do with it, but built it all today. Edit this page will take you in GitHub where this page actually lives. It's a markdown file. If we look at the raw version of it, some other presentation frameworks work the same sort of way, where in Markdown 3 hyphens is just a horizontal rule, and this works by just taking and this entire file's worth of contents, it just splits on here, and we'll make slides for each one of these different things. So if we come back to where were we in here, we can take this whole thing and play it as a presentation. So that's where to find our slide deck and a little bit about how it's composed. It works with key arrows, so we can step through stuff like that. So if you're ever looking for the 2 links that I want to publish or make sure people have a chance to have to go review information, is this one right here, .gov.dev /slides/chatbot, and then each different slide gets put on its own link, and then also everything we've done for the bot itself, we've kind of set up as a big old mono repo on GitHub for lack of better governance. So every single one of these folders relates to some component of the chatbot that we've deployed or customized or had to involve in some way. There are some big notable sections in here and some smaller ones. And each one of these has like a README inside of it. And using Jekyll to publish those READMEs, we can get them. So here's just the README at that root level. And we can get them all on the GitHub Pages version of it. So here's the docs for that entire repository. And so this is the other link that I think if people are looking for follow-up, those are the 2 places I'll point you to. Veronica said, feel free to type in your questions here in Slack. I would definitely echo that. It's going to be really stale if I just come in and I think, chat for an hour and a half, a couple hours, and lecture at you. I'd love for this to be as engaged as possible. I will take any question about any topic, and no promises that I'll know the answer, but I think that'll help break up things as much as possible. Let me move on to starting this presentation. Okay, so I appreciate Veronica saying I know a lot about chatbots. It's really just been the last 3 months of kind of poking around at them and figuring out how they work, and spending some percentage of our time as a dev shop implementing them and working with them. So this is really, it's a good survey and kind of level and summary level of some of the technologies in play, but it's definitely just scratching the surface. I know there's a lot of, if we look at our backlog, this is an open source repository, so anybody who wants to spend time working on COVID can feel free to tackle any of these issues. I know there's a lot of aspects of this technology that we're not yet taking advantage of and just need to prioritize or need to spend some more time working on them. We've had tons of other projects in the same window, so it hasn't been an all-out push to get just chatbot features implemented. But I think we're really happy with what we've done so far. Like Veronica said, I work for the Department of Health. I'm the principal developer there, but it's a title I gave myself, so don't read too much into it. So far, no one has objected to that. But I have a team of 5 developers and 5 application developers. We have some database developers, some QA, some BA folks, all part of our internal dev shop for the Department of Health. And we have lots of projects we maintain and programs and divisions that we service. And a lot of that has been mission central for COVID stuff as we kind of work through data and work through setting up infrastructure around pop-up test clinics. There's just a phenomenal amount of work that our developer group has certainly been a part of, but everyone in the Department of Health has just done a fantastic job. I'll color that. I certainly don't speak for the Department of Health. I don't think they have a problem with me giving talks and stuff like this, but take any of you might be able to trust my tech opinions, but I'm not a doctor. I don't know. I'm not an epidemiologist. There's certainly people who are better informed as we kind of overlap with COVID related topics for this presentation. Here's kind of what I want to talk about. Just some acknowledgements for the people who have worked on this project so far. I'd like to then kick things off with a demo of what a final product of a chatbot looks like and what ours is doing right now in a version of production, really against tests, because I don't want to mess with our telemetry. Some of the technologies that are in play, some of the training that you'll have to do if you have a bot. Everybody always asks about pricing, so we can go over the costs for things. They can scale. I mean, it's Azure, so there's no one sacred version, but I can share kind of the overview of what pricing is. Some of our lessons learned, and towards the end, getting into an Azure demo and just looking at how to spin up all this stuff. I think most of it's kind of spin upable relatively quick, but it's always one of those things where, I was having this discussion at work yesterday, I really, I hate when kind of we as developers like to flex a little and be like, oh, I spun this up in a weekend, and or I spun it up last night or in a day, and then we have to maintain it for the next 6 months, or we put in another 2-4 weeks, and so that's the real cost of that implementation. So getting something deployed to production or spun up quickly isn't necessarily the golden egg that it's made out to be, but certainly we can try deploying something relatively quickly. There were kind of 4 teams that came together, and these are all internal VDH things, so I won't go through people, specifically. I want to give them credit because certainly I'm presenting a lot of work that other people have had a hand in doing, but mostly to the point that this was a large collaborative effort. This wasn't just devs. This was communications team played a huge role. It was the first time I'd worked with all the members of our communications team because we just don't normally cross paths in a lot of the applications that we build internally. Vermont is kind of structured such that we have all these different agencies, and then each agency has departments, and then each department has divisions, and then each division has like programs, which is just lots of levels of bureaucracy, as any large organization can or should. But we also have a group called ADS, which is the Agency of Digital Services, and they kind of oversee all of our development effort. And so they kind of got the ball rolling on some of our Azure stuff, some of the chatbot stuff, and then Microsoft themselves, and I have a slide later talking about some of the stuff that Microsoft, they were very helpful and instrumental in getting the ball rolling on this. They did this for a number of states. Oh boy, Missouri was the group that first kind of set up a chatbot through the same exact technology stack that we're deploying it through, and kind of shared some code with us. But Microsoft was kind of intermediaries for that. They held for weeks on end. They had held daily open office hours, and anyone could go ping them and ask them questions. And if they were getting stuck somewhere, they helped out a lot of states and a lot of states' health departments get some of this stuff up and running. So credit to them where credit's due. They were very helpful in getting us off the ground, and then the team's kind of been very helpful in keeping us off the ground. So without further ado, and because this isn't a PowerPoint and it's in my beloved webland, I can embed some iframes in here. So this is our chatbot that hits against our knowledge base of frequently asked questions that we get from the community about COVID-related stuff, and we're publishing that or syndicating it across a couple different channels. Does anyone? This is one of the few high-value engagement opportunities in meeting chat. If people want to post a question, I can type that in. I certainly can probe with some questions myself, but I'll give folks a second to see if they want to type in the meeting chat a COVID-related question, and then we'll go give the bot a live run for its money and see how it does. While people are certainly thinking about that. Have slight cough and fever. Sweet, thanks. Thanks, Ricardo. Let's say, so have slight cough and fever. Sweet. So here's what the bot returns. What are the symptoms of COVID-19? Some of the backing technology of this, and we'll get to technologies later, is there like cognitive services that does natural language processing. It's certainly not a world of dev that I know how to do out of the box. So it's like, I'd rather buy that, I'd rather get that software from Microsoft to have them do it. So it says, what are the symptoms of COVID-19? We talk about cough, we talk about fever in here. And then you can kind of optionally provide all these follow-up prompts to say, hey, I asked about this. Here are all the other related questions that we know people care about or are interested in. Once I have that information, maybe I want to know if I can get tested for COVID-19. So I can click that, and we get this kind of multi-turn conversation where it submits that query, and then I get that. Bill also asked, is it important to wear a mask? And I'm normally very stringent about fixing my typos, but I'm going to leave it in because I want to make sure that, it's doing the work of figuring out how to parse that question, because in the real world, we'll certainly get typos. What can I wear if my health or work environment doesn't allow me to wear a cloth or face mask covering? So I think this is a good example of where when we have this language processing, we certainly have hit some of these words, right? Wear mask, but maybe important here is the real critical word. And this probably enumerates some of the pros and cons about it. And there's certainly other follow-up questions that we could ask. But but maybe maybe there's a slightly more better option within our knowledge base to land at. And so we can talk about how maybe we can try to take input queries and make sure they return the right output query. One piece that we manually add to every question, there are ways to put attach card footers to everything that gets returned, but we just say, all right, this did not answer my question, then we log those. And we kind of give them a, sorry, we couldn't find a good match. You know, here's different things. We have a 211, we have a call center line that people can call into. This was kind of our first wave of defense against the call center to say, hey, if we can answer something automatically, and not to paint this as a generational thing, but I'm certainly of the mind that if I can get through finding a piece of knowledge without calling someone, I will definitely do that. I hate being on the phone. I hate calling people. I hate waiting on the phone. I'd much rather do a chatbot where I can kind of wait asynchronously or find information immediately. So I think that multi-pronged attack kind of helps. That this is a wall of defense against huge call center volumes, which I think I put this in the project reflections. Historically, we didn't even have a call center. We had a couple temp positions, and that was it. We just don't have. Oh, good. Where can I get a test? We didn't have a huge volume of incoming calls, and so we had no reason to staff anything. And with the onset of COVID-19 and how much the health department has really taken point on a number of those things, it's just cannibalized almost every other department we have and program we have. So people are volunteering hours where they go become informed, like figure out all of our FAQs, but then answer public questions and kind of work through some hierarchy to make sure that they have the right answer. Where can I get a test from Jason? And we get, where can I get tested for COVID-19? As someone who doesn't type in this often, and whenever we're doing like live demos, it's nice when this returns back a result somewhat mirroring the question. So thank you for the question, Jason. Here's some information about that. The substance of the knowledge base allows like rich text formatting via Markdown. So we can have links in here. We can have images if we want, but we don't have any. We can have bold and list and stuff like that. And then, you know, if we were off the mark a little, these are all questions we've manually said, well, you know, if you got to this question, maybe these are relevant things too. What is serologic testing, or how long is the turnaround for testing if you've already done that? So that's a demo of our bot. One thing, just to kind of paint the whole stack of technologies, the bot is the front end for, specifically the web chat piece of the bot is the front end for how we leverage those technologies. One of the technologies in play is just QnA Maker, which is where the knowledge base is maintained. And one thing we can do is syndicate that across other places. So one place we have is definitely the bot. The other place where we take what we put into QnA Maker and we build out is through this FAQ. So here is every single question that we had access to over the bot, and just kind of in a different way to discover that same information. This is something where we read in the API data, we just get a JSON payload for that, and then we take that through a site builder and we just scaffold out that data and template it out across this page. So here we have all of the questions that we have covered overall. We can expand them and get information about any one of them. And one of the things we have on here is just kind of a filtering. And for me, this is kind of my favorite way in terms of UX and how we can architect things. I think filtering a big list of things is one of my favorite UX patterns. So if we say, you know, something like test in here, we're going to get all of these answers that have to do with testing, either somewhere in the question, somewhere in the summary. If we don't have anything highlighted here, it means somewhere in this body we're talking about testing. If we want to know stuff like pets, we can take some of the stuff that we've aliased. So we have some synonyms at the question level. And so if I type in pets, I get pets. But also if I type in dog, I should see more things. But I also see dog is synonymous with pet. And so pet gets highlighted all the same. And that gets, maybe if I type in dogs, it will, yeah, reduce the number of things. So can pets get sick from COVID-19, or are pets from the shelter safe to adopt, or can I get COVID-19 from my pet or other animals? These are some of the things that we have answered. We have kind of everything grouped into some categories and subcategories. So on the left, we can navigate to any one of those categories. We can link to categories. We can link to particular questions, and you can send them to your friend or to your family. And this is all generated based on the information that's put into the knowledge base. And again, these are just two prongs. Here's a demo of the chatbot. We have that on our official health.vermont.gov site, and this is our vermont.gov app domain that we normally deploy all of our kind of internal apps through that are authenticated and stuff like that. So these are two of the ways that we expose all of that information. Are there any kind of questions about that? Or hopefully one of the things I kind of want to do is like get people thinking about, you know, how can I use this sort of stuff, or how can we assemble? It's certainly gotten us thinking about how we can leverage a knowledge base as an organization outside of COVID specific response where it's kind of been high priority. It's like, yeah, I just kind of want a knowledge base of things. That doesn't seem like a bad thing to have. If I get some natural language processing for free on it, if I get a structure to that data, that kind of makes sense, and I can scaffold it out somewhere else, that kind of helps. So I think those all play a role in that. Let's bop back into here. So those are the two kind of live demos of the end product. And now let's kind of poke under the hood of that car and see how we got there. In terms of the technology stack, and I already kind of gave this overview. First up is just QnA Maker. And what QnA Maker is responsible for is actually maintaining that knowledge base. It's a Microsoft product. And it stores that information into Azure, but it's entirely set. You could stop at the QnA, not that you'd want to, but you could stop at the QnA Maker level. It doesn't come with a bot for free. You have to also instantiate bots and however you want to consume that information. Bot framework is the next thing that logically you do with QnA Maker. Most of the samples go from one and then to the other. 11D is what we're is QnA Maker an Azure service? It is. So it's QnA Maker. It's not actually. It's fair to think of it that way. QnA Maker is really the GUI piece or the set of APIs that interact with an Azure service. If you're looking at your subscription or you're looking at the billing, the thing that's actually running is cognitive services. But yes, when you need nothing beyond an Azure tenant or an Azure login to be able to log into QnA Maker and deploy QnA Maker. So everything that is done inside there is stored within an Azure resource group. I don't think the name of the service itself is QnA Maker, and maybe that'll be a little clearer when we poke at these things live in Azure. But good question, Bill. Thanks. And then I'm a big fan of static site generation. I think anytime we don't need huge, rich interactivity. I mean, in fact, we have a non-zero amount of interactivity here when we say, you know, there's a little bit of JavaScript running on this page to do some of this filtering. But it very gracefully falls back if you have no JavaScript. If I come into here and I go to disable JavaScript, and I go refresh this page, everything's going to be perfectly fine. And in fact, that filter box goes away too. That filter box only comes in as soon as it's hidden by default, and as soon as JavaScript comes in, it says, "Oh, I'll unhide it with my JS, you know, voodoo." Because if you don't have JavaScript enabled, I shouldn't be able to see that filter thing. So this very gracefully falls back on old machines. Server-side rendering has some of these same benefits, but in terms of performance, you're very snappy on mobile devices if you need to run, you know, a lot of people are asking stuff on mobile devices. So we want to be able to support that environment. And so, you know, even if this is small, we're still going to have a decent experience, which is more the layout and CSS properties of the thing. but this is kind of what we have in terms of a site experience, and not that 11D is the only way to get there. There are tons of static site generators, and I could my talk at Boston Code Camp and Vermont Code Camp last year in the fall was about static site generators with the gentleman I worked on the Vermont Code Camp site with, which is a static site generator. So I can certainly talk about that all day. It's something that I think is a really good space on the web. But we're using 11D to build out that FAQ page. So we'll go over a little bit of that piece of things. Probably if that's something people are super interested in, either maybe we have time at the end if that's the direction enough people want to go in. Certainly you can hit me up later. I think the first slide had my Twitter handle, and my DMs are open if you want to talk about that specifically, or maybe I don't want to bombard Azure Boston, but I know static web hosting is something that Azure's kind of recently put their hand in. So they're starting to do that. And Markdown, I love Markdown also. That's probably, as I move to senior roles and I spend more time helping people build stuff and in on meetings, I write in Markdown more than I write in probably any other programming language. So I like things that are powered by it. QnA Maker we talked about, that's the knowledge base. As of build 2020, they finally have a rich text editor in there. So when we're talking about the people who I really want managing that content are not necessarily developers. Not that developers can't or shouldn't, but the goal of the QnA Maker is to put it in the hands of a subject matter expert or a communications expert who knows how to do that. And our communications team has done a fantastic job. They keep a lot of first order principles in mind about using simple language. One of the things that I want to be able to show at some point, and as we look at this stuff, this is a secret little hidden view that is not, there's a diff.html. And one thing that's in here is there's a little yellow dot if that question has been changed at all. And there's a green dot if it's a new question. And these are all just changes in the last 24 hours. And every day, there's just a tremendous amount of ways that they're very careful with wording and language. Some of them are tiny and some of them are conjugations. And some of them are just converting things into plain language. So every day they spend a lot of time just managing this inventory of questions and really carefully thinking about what is the easiest to read. And so that's something that I think relies on their expertise. And it's something that I certainly don't want to spend all day doing, or don't necessarily have the skill set to be doing all day. So to that end, having that rich text editor for them is so much easier than having them edited in Markdown. That's not, it's not a hard language to learn, I think, for a lot of people. But certainly WYSIWYG editors are far easier to, I mean, if ever I'm using it on the QnA Maker, I always use the WYSIWYG. So here's the GUI. We'll actually get into it later, but here's just a screenshot of it. You're gonna have to zoom in. I can do that. I'll zoom in for you. Here's the rich text editor. Here's like the bolding piece of this. Here's italics. Here's lists and paragraphs. And if you want to include the links, you can do that. And it's gonna go convert it to Markdown in the back end. Here we have one of the training things that we'll talk about too, which is there's the question of can I wear a mask, but then there's alternative phrasings to this. So if someone says alternatives to a mask or face shields, these are all kind of things that questions that are like this or similar to these questions will all feed into this answer. And one of the things we do is we just see a huge volume of questions, and we see a huge different we did a little bit, I think like a week of some QA and UA for this, and as soon as we opened it up to the public, we just realized how entirely insufficient QA was to kind of think just what spaghetti the public is going to throw out the fridge and see what comes in. And they're all perfectly valid questions. They're all great things to make sure that we're mapping. So we've grown that out a lot over time. What that looks like if we go hit it over the API in terms of if you just want to get into the meat of what the data looks like, is it kind of looks like this. There's some, I simplified this down a little bit, but in each one of these particular questions, we're going to have alternative phrasings across the board. And interestingly, this order is not deterministic. So when you first enter a question, it will just have one of these values. So it's like, here's the question, what are the symptoms of COVID-19? And then we'll have an answer, and that answer, I don't have wrap on, so it will go here, and our answer is actually much longer than that, but I cut it off here. If you want to add alternative phrasings, you can do that, but these orders can sometimes get shuffled around. These are all on even footing. There's no one true question that maps into this. Is if I ask any one of these things, I'm likely to get this answer as a result. There's ways to manage metadata at each one of the question levels. Those keys for metadata are just free text. You put in whatever key you want, whatever value you want. And so we're using it to, at the question level, identify groups and subgroups that things are a part of. You can see that very easily here. So it's basically that entire organization effort was just done for the FAQ piece of that. It doesn't, you have, if you want to extend to the bot service, you certainly have access to the metadata at the point in time that you are returning an answer. But we're not leveraging that in any way right now. But as we template out stuff, we say, all right, put everything inside of its groups, put everything inside of its subgroups, and then give me all the symptoms and put that in here. So that makes this list much easier to parse than just an alphabetical listing of 150 questions. So you can put in whatever metadata you want. We started with just categories, and then we extended it to subcategories. We have some other stuff if we need short text for something, if we need sorting. These are all things that you then manually have to go take advantage of programmatically if you want them. So, you know, just obviously because it's just free text, you know, just putting sort doesn't do anything. It's just whatever keywords you want to use to shove data in there, you can. It comes back, and it's a little weird. It comes back as this array of name value pairs instead of like an object with that already has key value pairs. Which is fine, but when we're talking about manipulating and like ETLing and massaging this object shape, sometimes it gets a little tricky at that end. But this is essentially the unit of work that is being saved per each one of these questions. Then the QnA Maker API. So we had talked about in 2 slides ago, you know, here's the GUI for this thing. This is the way that you're by and large going to interact with QnA Maker. The entirety of the way that they communicate is over REST API. So this GUI itself kind of dog foods. If you look at the network traffic, it's implementing the REST API as well. And so they have a REST API endpoint for anything that you can do in there, if it's questions or stuff like that. I have that. If you want to do that, we created a Postman collection just as the kind of easiest entry point into here. And you can share collections and import collections in Postman, and you can import and export environment variables. This isn't any one of our keys, but you can template out and scaffold what environment variables people need to populate. And here's kind of a walkthrough of where to go look for each one of those environment variables, what to import, what kind of things look like in general. And what it will give you is, here's Postman, here's the knowledge base. I think people are probably familiar with Postman. If you're not, this talk probably isn't scoped to that, but suffice to say it's a popular kind of API runner. So that you could also curl things. You could also, there's a lot of ways to hit an API, but when there's, you have to pass certain authorization headers in here. There's certain stuff you have to do. So it's nice when you can kind of store all of those routes inside of here. So they have some APIs for the knowledge base. And so one of them's like, if I just run a download, it will send off that request to knowledge base. It will pass in our knowledge base ID, it'll pass in the environment we want, and then we can see all of these things that come back. And here's like an example of, here's that question we were just looking at, is what are the symptoms of COVID-19? Here's the full darn response. Here's the whole list of questions that we have that map to this question. Here's some more of the metadata and some objects that, let me zoom in on this too. Oh, I can't, unless this works. Sure, sure does. And then each question also has some sense of what the follow-up prompts are. So that whole list of things, this is ordered. This order is deterministic when it's saved. So whatever order things show up in here, that's usually how they get preserved. But you can also forcibly say this one should be first or last or something. And so, oh, you know, we might not have done this enhancement, but we had intended to. This did not answer my question. We always put at the bottom, and I think we had intended to, you know, put this as like 999. Oh, I can't change data, but like change this to like 9999 because this should never. We want to ask it on every question to make sure we're capturing which, you know, input output pairs didn't return good results. But it should never interrupt all of these other things. I want to get to these things first. And then it's just a whole big document. This is, if I download, I'm getting literally everything. One piece that you have to rely on Postman for, so they have all of these APIs to go interact with how they're storing this data and updating and deleting the data and reading it. The GUI will give you access to all of these operations. Alterations are something that is not available over the GUI. The only way you can possibly add word alterations is at this level. So I don't want to get ahead of myself in slides. We'll talk about it in a little bit. I think I have a slide on training, and it's about the things that we can do to train. But suffice to say, alterations are one piece of that. And you're going to have to, at some point, call an API. There's tons of clients to call APIs. We're just doing it with Postman right now. I mean, we call some clients to hydrate our FAQ site as well. But there are lots of ways to do it. I think Postman is the easiest one if we just want to go modify some stuff without building anything custom. Okay, back to slides. So you can import our collection. That's published on our GitHub repo. It's the only way to modify alterations over the API. Most stuff, though, certainly anything we've had program people do is all over the GUI. Bot framework. Okay, this is ripped right from the bot framework website. Let me just read it directly. It's an AI and natural language. Maybe there's supposed to be more there. Create a bot with the ability to speak, listen, understand, and learn from your users and with Azure Cognitive Services. Okay, so that's their kind of like sales pitch for bot framework with some missing words somewhere. What this does is still, so QnA Maker, there's a service on top of a service here. When I run QnA Maker, not the GUI part, but actually live, there's a runtime for it, and it goes and hits this generate answer endpoint. You know, if we have a question like this, we send this body message to QnA Maker to the runtime endpoint. We send something like that, and we get a response back from them. And we get, surprisingly, we get an answer back. I was expecting we wouldn't unless something came in. But is this piece interesting? Folks here, you do that here. And I think we'll, just to prove that we're getting some live response back. Okay, somehow we got this response back too. I won't mull on it during the presentation, but I'm surprised by that. So that's the cognitive services endpoint, which is a service that's running. It runs over a REST endpoint. It returns back this JSON object as well. The bot framework really runs a service under the hood. So the bot framework returns kind of what they call an adaptive card. It's information to go get parsed by whatever front end you're attaching this to, because the bot framework is really the telephone wires between all this stuff. It depends on what your front end is going to do, but it's kind of managing all of these things. So it itself is over a REST endpoint, and you call the bot framework and you say, hey, I have this query. It submits the query to the cognitive services endpoint, and then gets the response back, and then also bundles that response and wraps that response with adaptive cards, with any of the information that is applicable to where it's getting deployed. To that end, it can get deployed to all. If there's a place you can think of having a input question and an output response, bot framework can probably do it. They have out of the box, I think they have a couple dozen different native supported channels to publish things over. And then there's a custom adapter. So really, and I think there are enough community projects that have taken those custom adapters and put them to weird places, but you can also write your own. So for example, things like web chat are the thing that we looked at first. So that's just a web chat framework. I have like a little grid there. We're embedding it in our page with an iframe. You can also do it with a JS library, stuff like that. But also that bot framework, you just have a knowledge base, right? I think that's the biggest difference, or the biggest reason to kind of hit on those two different technologies is solving different goals. You have a knowledge base that can be published anywhere, and the bot framework is responsible for the publishing. So if you want this on Slack, if you want it on MS Teams, if you want it on Discord, if you want it via a phone call, if someone calls in, you can do that over Twilio. You can also do SMS. You can do Alexa or any smart speaker. There's a lot of ways that you can publish that information. You can do it over WhatsApp. I think the obvious use case, or the first use case they anticipate you hitting, is to do it over web chat. But once you have that available, is if you have customers who are looking to do this over SMS, or if you want to, implement something for your teams on Slack, and this is your own organizational internal knowledge base and repository, maybe Slack returns that answer, and so the bot framework wires up that handshake, that exchange in between that end service and the knowledge base. And then specifically, the bot framework web chat is another piece where Microsoft writes the bot framework, so that's taken off your plate. A lot of this is like given to you to extend if you want, but comes out of the box. So bot framework is that service. The primary consumption of that service is the web chat piece. And so they also write the bot framework web chat front end for that. This is their repository for that. Here's one way to new this up is you can put it in an iframe that talks directly to that, or you can kind of wire up a script that goes and hits their web chat. You can also hook it into React if you're using React on any web front ends. And then render stuff with whatever kind of settings you want here. Different colors or different user IDs or different pictures for your avatar, stuff like that. And so, yeah, you can change colors, you can change sizes, update the CSS styles if you're doing that JavaScript invocation. It's a little bit harder to do that in the iframe. Listen to events, interact with web page hosting. And then if you choose React on top of that, you have kind of some React-y extensions to render UI components, stuff like that. So they also produce the web chat. All three of those kind of technologies together were in what we got out of that first demo. Is all three of them have to come into play: the QnA Maker, bot framework, and web chat. We already looked at the FAQ site. Oh, I'm missing a slide divider here. Only read the top half. Look at this. Look at that. Okay. This part. 11D. It's a static site generator. We go. This was a gimmick. We don't need that. It's a static site generator. There are lots of others, and if you haven't explored static site generators, there's a website called Static Gen. Netlify produces this site, but it's kind of agnostic to them at the same end of things. They're just very much into this Jamstack and site generation. And they have these filters here. So this is just an aggregate of all the static site generators, and you can pick a language if you want to write things in C#, or if you want to write things in Elixir. Whoops. If you want any templating language, so handlebars or Mustache or React or Markdown or Jade or JSX, you can kind of filter what your conditions are and then find a static site generator that kind of works for you. And the main thing I always want to do as my soapbox, as my PSA to dispel, is that static site generators, the word choice in them is it makes them sound static. They can get they're so inexpensive to deploy that they can get rebuilt every minute. It's never hard to go rebuild a static site generator, so you can get a lot of live data in them. It doesn't necessarily mean you set it and forget it forever. Ricardo says you can also use SendGrid to send emails. Yep, that's true. One of our devs managed to do that. Cool. That's awesome. So we're using a static site generator. We go hit that QnA Maker API, go get that JSON data we looked at earlier, and then template it out. Another piece that we just added, and I do a lot with web apps, and I don't do a lot with websites, and so I'm not very strong on my SEO game, but I kind of explore some of this stuff occasionally. Google has all of these structured data pieces. Maybe this is news to some people, and maybe it's not. But you can have structured data within a page, and that kind of gets a lot of the feature cards that you see when querying Google is because that site provider or some site aggregator actually took and spent the time to actually build out this information as specific metadata for Google to parse. So they have things for movies, and if you get these movie cards, it means some site provider put the data in the correct structure to be there. They have things for recipes, and they look like this. So if you've ever gotten search results like this doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because Google's smart and scrapes the right fields. It happens because somebody puts in the right metadata tags. And so they have one for FAQs also, and so we recently just kind of adapted. We're already getting this stuff over JSON. All we have to do is kind of have it look roughly like this. In fact, exactly like this. It's really not more complicated than that. So we just take all of the data that we pull in over the static site generator and map it to this format. We say, here's a question. We have the name of that question. And then we say, here's our one accepted answer. You can only put one. And the type of that thing is answer, and then here's the answer, and it even supports some HTML inside of there. Let me refresh this. I can't scroll, but you've seen an answer before. Oh, because this site got big. So that piece is going into the way that we build out that site. And if we Google for stuff, we actually get to see these things returned explicitly. I think Google crawled it overnight when I was poking at this. We can see if we can invoke live results by just querying this. This only got pushed out last week, but I'd like to see, okay, so I'd like to see us show up here. apps.health.vermont.gov, which is the website. And here's all the questions from that FAQ. And we can show more, and then we get kind of their prioritized list of questions from there. So that's kind of a third place to go syndicate this information. Some people are actually going to go land on the page, and that's totally fine. I'd love for them to and explore it. But if we can answer a question straight over Google, that's how I'd prefer to answer stuff. So that's another way to publish this information. Okay, so training. This is, I think I might have this in one of my lessons learned too, but this was absolutely the biggest volume of thing that I think caught us off guard when we started doing this. There is a ton, just getting the volume of incoming questions we have and making sure they map correctly. I think the natural language processing takes care of maybe that piece of the lift, but there's still hundreds of alternative phrasings that I wouldn't necessarily expect a natural language processor to do and pick up on. They can certainly kind of figure out sentence structure and maybe figure out some synonyms, but can I go to dinner and is it safe to go to a restaurant are really the same question right now in this context for these particular set of users, but they have very different words. And it's kind of hard to make sure that they always map to the correct thing. And so one thing that we wound up throwing a lot of labor hours at this, just in terms of when we, one thing we do is we export all of the queries. And as time allows, we go through, at first, we went through pretty much darn near every query that came into production. The irony of which is we had done this explicitly to make sure we could scale out call center so that we didn't have to individually look at every single question that was coming in. And what we wound up doing is looking at every single question that came in. And so I don't want to share people's exact questions. Most of them don't have any PHI in it. But this is where we just throw everything into Excel and we kind of triage it, and we throw our at each question we say, did that person answer it? Was there a better question? We break things up into two categories of training opportunities or missing FAQs. So if it's training opportunity, it means somewhere that question existed in our knowledge base and we didn't correctly get from that input to the correct output match. So those are training opportunities. We have to go figure that out. The missing FAQs, we said, all right, hey, I couldn't find the answer anywhere in the knowledge base to this particular thing. It looks like it would be really beneficial if we added an FAQ. And we do our best to kind of aggregate those. It's, a soft science, but we say, these missing FAQs all kind of had the same theme. A lot of people, you can see, because we have a daily scrum that meets and looks at this every single morning. And you can see these themes that grow with the data. Like if the governor has a press announcement about, we're doing this particular thing, all of a sudden the next day we get tons of questions, am I eligible for this? Or does this impact me? Or does this affect me? And so kind of being timely with receiving those new questions and getting them published, and kind of the feedback loop of, all right, people are asking about this thing, let's get it over to communications, because we're kind of the devs on our team are the one doing that triage, just because we got saddled with that work. Communications is flat out. So our kind of pitch was any way we can help and kind of make this product better over time, I'm all for. So we're kind of taking on that work. We give it some metadata flags, internally, just to say it kind of matches these criteria. It looks like this. One thing that QnA Maker does is it assigns a confidence score whenever it's giving a response back. And this pivot table is kind of interesting. This is our own accuracy as assigned by triage is pretty darn good. It means that we looked at this particular question, we made a determination about yes or no, did we answer this person's question? And it's, we're not fudging this, it's only for our internal benefit. And what's interesting is that, are you mainly adding questions and answers? We, not developers on the team, communications definitely are. And I guess it depends on where. And I'll talk about the different entry points for how we manage stuff. There's definitely some building of the knowledge base that actually helps solve gaps in accurately answering stuff. And then for the training stuff, I'll look at where we're actually going and adding those things. But here's the score range that was assigned by the bot, and here's kind of how accurate it was, and it tracks pretty well. One thing that accuracy by day, if we look at early on, we kind of had this triage log. This was how many of these questions have we triaged? Because as we started getting early responses back, it was just not great. This is like 1 in 5. This is even less than that. This is before we had very widely publicized that we were doing anything with the bot, and I was like, we got to pump the brakes on this. We can't really be we can't be tooting our own horns about the bot when we're getting 1 in 5 correct based on genuinely going through and seeing if it answered the question or not. That doesn't seem to be accurate enough. I don't know if we've really wasted anyone's time, and we already at that point had the fallback text to say, hey, if this didn't answer your question, give us a call, which I feel like is the best way to kind of treat those cases. But this was not very strong. And we built this up very well over time, like via training things. And there's still room for improvement, and there's still a depth of questions that is just huge. The number of things that we have 150 questions ish there right now as of today. And we do a lot of management on the same questions every day just to kind of keep up. Can I get tested? The answer to that changes pretty frequently over time based on what we have available, based on guidance from the CDC, based on incoming supplies, based on systems, based on college students coming in, there being different answers for them. So in our particular case, things evolve very quickly, but training is a big piece of how we get out of this kind of rut that we started in. So the triage is the biggest thing that I think I would caution people. If you're standing up a bot and it's public facing and it kind of represents you and your brand and what you're trying to put out in terms of information, that expect to do a non-trivial amount of triage and expect to kind of read through every single one of these questions. The plus side to that, or the upshot of it, is that we actually got really good data in terms of what people are asking, what people are anxious about. I think people are, we had phone data, or we had a phone center that people were fielding those questions, but it's very hard to take notes and kind of try to answer those questions at the same time. So we weren't logging the same depth of data from the call center as we were able to get from the bot. So it's actually given our communications team a huge window into what people are actually worried about, what people are asking about, and it's helped motivate extending our FAQ, which benefits both the call center folks and the bot and the FAQ page and the Google search results. It's once we can get that in the pipeline, it benefits a lot of people. Once we have, so the biggest thing to extend stuff with is just extending the knowledge base. I think that helps a lot. If we have a training opportunity where we just crossed wires, where somebody asked a question and absolutely existed in our knowledge base, and we didn't have the cognitive services didn't figure it out itself that it should have, and that's the goal, right? Is for it to do all of that work for you. What we're doing also is adding alternative phrasing and alternative wordings. The phrases we looked at from cognitive services at the QnA Maker level. So here's our production QnA Maker instance. This, interestingly, I think Bill asked about, is this on Azure? It is, but it's not like portal.azure.com/QnA Maker. You log into this site with your Azure credentials. Can you support answering questions with a dynamic answer? Say, with a database lookup, what's the wait time to get a test? How many cases confirmed are there in Vermont right now? Yes, you can. We haven't done that yet. You can do it at the bot framework level. So the adapter, you can't do it from cognitive services. So cognitive services just owns this knowledge base, that static text. One thing I have pulled up here is the bot service, which comes in and asks a question. It forwards that question along to the cognitive services and says, hey, give me an answer. If you want, at any point in that pipeline, you can tap into this and return a custom response if you want. And so if you parse through a question well enough to say, someone's looking for how many confirmed cases are there right now, we could tap into anything at that. Here we're just running C# on .NET. So here we could call any other API we want, call any other data set, run a SQL query, and return back custom information from within this workflow. I think most of the information exists at the base dialog level, where we get in some information, then we return back some option. So yeah, you could do that. We haven't taken on that kind of technical work for what problem we're solving. The low cost thing, right? Like the Yagni approach, you ain't gonna need it, is like, if somebody asks how many tests there are in Vermont right now, we just send them to a link on our dashboard that has that information there. So I think the beautiful, elegant UX approach would be to just say, inline, here's my results, without having to go wayfind to other places. But right now, if you ask that question, you should just get a link. That link should be to our dashboard. That dashboard is always under review to publish more information, but because we have a small state and small districts and stuff, the data team has kind of been reserved about what information is going out right now. To the as best they can, I think that information goes out, and so there's a lot of information there. I think we should get how many confirmed cases, stuff like that. Andrew said, "Hey, can you train AI ML to analyze the calls from a quality point of view, or maybe pick out specifics upon your phone system through Cisco?" I don't know. It's certainly a question that we haven't explored. Most of our calls, I guess, are going over VoIP, so there might be a way to tap into that information and try to kind of get some sentiment analysis or something like that. The managers do record calls to review. Yeah, and like I said too, we're just so new to the call center game. So much of this got spun up kind of at the last minute. No, it's a great question. It's something that I like kind of seeing these things and think through, oh, could that fit into our use case? And, have we actually asked ourselves about that? So yeah, we don't record calls. I think because it's from the public, I think we probably have different kind of sensitivities to how much we're gonna collect information from people who haven't consented to that yet. We're very cognizant about those sorts of things in ways that private companies might not need to be as concerned. And that little voice style that says, it's probably being recorded is probably enough. But yeah, certainly we do get that sort of sentiment analysis manually through triage, through that kind of painstaking task. But it would be good to get more metrics out of what our call center folk are doing too. Or ask a question to them. Maybe if you're not asking something, it might be missed. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's it's like building software, right? It's like these are separate teams, and there's a lot to. And we historically haven't done a lot of stuff together. And it's not like we had this as a project on our priority log to go write a bot 5 months ago. This was nowhere near something we were looking at doing, and it just kind of spun up, and communication is a big piece of it. And throughout the length of this, we've kind of been getting on the we send a lot of messages back and forth through email and Teams, but we've been getting on the horn with communications once every week, once every other week to kind of hash through what their options are, and see if there are ways that we can better improve services, and with that brainstorming mentality of no bad ideas, let's throw some ideas out and see what we can do. Not crossing turf, though I do look at call center teams. It's not my main job, and don't like getting involved too much, though we had to help on storage for voice calls, and that's how I got involved. Interesting. Yeah. Certainly there are huge storage demands too if you want to store that much voice data across time, especially with a decent enough call center volume. Okay, so we can add alternative phrasings and alterations. So I think picking up, I had got into here. I said, we're not exactly in Azure. We're at QnAMaker.ai. You log in through your Azure account. And so I can go to this knowledge base and see what's in here now. And this is all public facing stuff, right? So this is all what we're eventually seeing on the FAQ. This is what was in that screenshot. And so one of the things we do during training is to say, here's alternative phrasing for this question. And we do this anytime we've identified somebody having asked a question that this answer specifically addresses, and we'll put it here. One thing that, so this is at the phrase level. This maps an entire question to an entire answer. At the word level, one thing we want to do is they call alterations, right? These are just words in English that also carry other semantic meanings behind them. So there's no reason to kind of think about them as different other than this is kind of how QnA Maker has drawn the line. Alterations exist at a word level, and the examples of that, if we go over to Postman, which is the only access point for alterations, are, let me go do get alterations. What we have in here are things like doctor, healthcare provider, as soon as it's done sending this request, primary care provider, primary care physician, PCP, doctor, MD. what we hit before we found out about alterations, what we were originally doing, and this was true of coronavirus too, are, can I get sick from coronavirus? And then we'd add an alternative phrase, can I get sick from COVID-19? And then can I get sick from COVID space 19 or COVID-19 or coronavirus 19 or corona? And so, here are all the different alterations for sometimes the novel coronavirus. Here, there were all these different wordings. And I want all roads to lead to Rome in that case. I want all of those to be considered the same. And it was too hard to do that alternative phrasing at every single question level. So we can say, yeah, treat all of these as identical. And that also we're consuming. So the cognitive services engine consumes that data. We consume that data as well on the FAQ. So on here, this is leveraging that same thing where if I type in COVID, COVID. I think we call this COVID. So if I type in corona, I should also get COVID here. Just the way that we've implemented this search feature to leverage those synonyms. Those are different processes, but it's the same data that is leveraging both of those in that case. Back to here, that's training. A couple things came in. The main query is that their software can pick up on specific words, I think. Yeah, and I don't think we're even doing sentimental analysis to too large an extent on the bot, where then we don't even have the difficulty of recording voices and I think the first entry point we'd have to sentiment analysis is probably just on the bot traffic coming in, because we already have it in plain text. It's already something I can send to an ML or AI engine to tell me, hey, tell me how this was going in general. Because we've definitely got people who were frustrated, as certainly I would expect or can believe, at how they're getting services just across the board. There's a lot of frustration. I understand that. And I think we want to do our best to help people through that. So yeah, I certainly think if we do poke at that, it might be worth doing it against our logs of existing questions that we have already on paper already, and just kind of see if it's gotten better, see if it's gotten worse. That might be interesting. How do we get questions out of Azure, you might be wondering? And if we were, we have a lot of stuff deployed on-prem. I'm kind of getting excited about private link in Azure and having that, how we can provision some IP ranges within our VNet and still deploy to Azure services. But mostly we have, private link's super cool because there's very few things that historically we've wanted any public endpoints on. Almost every project I've been attached to has not been public facing. COVID's the first one where it's like, hey, this is intentionally public facing, but most of the time it's on applications that are private facing. It's for our internal partners to, we have the birth registry and the death registry and the immunization registry. And if you want a birth certificate, it's through our IT department that has the software to go route it. And so the public should not be logging into that. And so we have some servers that do IIS stuff, and that's kind of been where we've deployed web apps to, and it's been pretty comfortable and not that controversial and not that difficult to maintain. And so it's only recently we've kind of been starting to migrate most of our stuff to Azure. That's my goal, because I just don't want to do the server maintenance. I want some of those problems to go away, which is all to say, if you've been using Azure already, you are familiar with Application Insights probably to some end, and Kusto and KQL. We were not. So all of the data that's available from the bot, you can get through Application Insights. It comes wired up by default. And it kind of has this interesting syntax. There are some, and if we look at where we have our documentation, and we have our repo structure, and here's the actual queries we're using. So here's our App Insights query. I think I have this on the GitHub page in AI query. Here's the KQL we're actually running to go get some of this information out of here. And then I have some readmes trying to talk through, and one of the resources is SQL to Kusto query translation. If you're kind of new to that but familiar with SQL, I kind of had to wrestle with a lot of these things to kind of think through how they're working. And one interesting piece is just the order of operations that things happen. So normally in SQL, you have like, select, from, where, and then maybe a group by or an order by, and you write it in that order, and it's sacred. It's important that you do it. But the execution order bounces all over the place. First, we care about the from, and then we care about the predicate and actually evaluating the where, and then we care about like the projection operator, the select. And so it happens all over the place in a normal SQL query. And if you really think about it with fresh eyes, that makes no sense. And usually if I'm writing a SQL query, right, I'm probably writing like select star just to immediately get to the from, alias that table, and then I can go write, some select statements out of there. Or I don't think of it in that order. I think of it as like, where am I getting the data? What predicate or filtering operations am I doing to it? And what data do I want to project? And so I think the biggest thing, kind of in addition to the syntactical differences to think through in App Insights, are this order. Like if you're familiar with PowerShell or a lot of other scripting languages, this executes this one piece and it's pausable here. You could be done and you say, yeah, I'm just traces, and by default it projects out whatever the last result is. And then if you just highlight this piece, it runs traces, and then it runs the where clause. You didn't need a where clause here, and certainly you could follow it up. I can't modify this, but you can write one where clause, and you can put end statements on there. Oh, and I forgot to get rid of this end in like this code sample, but you can put multiple things, and this is independently runnable. And if I want to filter stuff more, I can add another where clause. There's kind of some cool operators in here that SQL doesn't have, stuff like extend. So extend says, I want you to keep every single bit of information you have in the table so far, but also put these additional columns on top of there. And that kind of has helped us, on traces, it has a custom dimensions field. But one of the reasons why I think they couldn't get away with, I was trying to read, hey, why didn't they just write SQL or make the application insights logs queryable over SQL? And one of the reasons seems to be, well, it's storing complex document data that's not necessarily built in a way that SQL's always been able to handle. I think SQL now can store like some JSON documents and XML and stuff. But this is like an object that's stored in that column, and it can have nested arrays and properties on here. So here I wanted to grab the question from custom dimensions, and I extend traces to put that as an input property. I'm not getting rid of anything else. I could have done, the keyword there is project. We could have projected to only get these 4 fields, but I wanted all the fields plus these 4. So what we end up with in this case is like a complicated little query, but we only have to write it once. And anytime we want to run it, that can be what extracts data out of there, and that's what we put into that Excel file at the end of the day. If you've done a lot with KQL before, that's not going to be super new. Maybe exactly where to go look, and I think the documentation on that is a little bit spotty as to where to go look for stuff necessarily. But definitely, if you want a starter thing, hit the repo, and I think that kind of rolls around some of those concepts. Pricing. As I said, I just built this whole slideshow presentation thing today, and I probably would have put some borders on this. Here's a little pricing chart. There are other services. If we go to Azure right now, here's I already have this open to our resource group for COVID bot test. Here's technically all the services we're provisioning. Most of the ones that cost any amount of money to run are the cognitive service search, the app service plan, the cognitive services, and the bot service. The cognitive service search gets really expensive really quick if you need high volumes. We are not seeing anywhere near the type of volume that B is second from the bottom in terms of pricing tier. We're not seeing anywhere towards the volume that we'd even need to jump out of this and move to a higher tier. But we basically have 2 systems right now. We have a test and prod. Test costs $0. for that service, but you can only have one per subscription key for a lot of those freebie things. So if you wanted to test and prod, you can't just do 2 $0 ones. And we absolutely would have a dev environment if it didn't cost us an extra $164 a month, just so we could have the full darn SDLC. But it's going to cost us those prod pricings. So I'll make do with test and prod. Not that any of this is super expensive on a broad scale. So Azure Cognitive Azure Cognitive Search is definitely the most expensive thing. Between test and prod, that runs $75 a month. Service plan, we're doing a D1 and an S1. That's $82 a month for both those environments. Cognitive services, again, a free one, but you can only have one instance per subscription. You could put down another credit card if you really wanted a second subscription. But I think some of those things scapegoating around. I think Azure has a lot of free things, aren't in the spirit of that, whether or not it's you're allowed to do it or not. And then we're just doing an S0 for our cognitive services. Bot services is like 50, I think this is, 50 cents per 1,000 messages. So it's running, $6 a month maybe. So in total, $174 is not anything that's making or breaking the bank, I think, for what we're getting out of it, and leveraging free tiers on all of our test environments. Lessons learned. Okay, plan a lot of time for training. We already talked about this, but you can't get it off the ground unless you can have some degree of accuracy, especially if it's public facing. And I always worry, my own personal end user experience with bots is when they're bad, it actually makes me more upset, right? Like I don't have any data to back that, but if bots are bad, I get more upset. I feel like I've wasted my time waiting for the bot and not getting any answer back. So I think it's important. I think you learn something in the training time. That is a valuable thing to learn anyway, but I would guess that out of the box, it's not going to be exactly what you want. Get content authors involved early, and a big piece of this is that, as Bill kind of talked about earlier, or at least I think of them as related, is that what makes a good bot answer is not necessarily the same thing that makes a good FAQ answer. So if I ask, is it raining out, right? Like these things that, maybe Google or Siri, your voice assistant, do really well. I don't want to link to the weather. I want to know yes or no, like that's it. It's if it's a one-line response, perfect. As long as it's exactly figured out what I wanted to ask it and giving me that answer back. So we originally had the start for our knowledge base, which I think only had like 70 questions. I think we've grown questions about every single week. And still to this day, it's all very FAQ themed. And there's a lot of information per question. But on several occasions, we've actually broken that up and forked it into 2 different questions. Here's a little bit, here's another little bit. We'll link those 2 together. Bot answers should be short and sweet and immediately just answer your query, which is what Bill was asking about. Hey, if I ask how many people, I'd love the bot to just tell me the answer to that. And while you can do it, I think as we look at our FAQs, all of them to be specifically tailored to what a bot is really good at, they should all be shorter. We're kind of double dipping and using it in our FAQ site, and our call center folks use the same FAQ that's available to the public. So it's helpful for them to have longer versions. So we're kind of dealing with, left brain, right brain, and a couple different, use cases for that data. But the earlier content authors can be involved in kind of helping figure out what's going to be on that framework. I think the better. Some tips and tricks. One problem is multi-author editing is still difficult, especially if you're coming from like the holy grail of multi-author editing, which is like, Google Drive or something on like a Word document. I think Microsoft has actually kind of caught up a little bit in their online Office 365 products, where you see a little head, chat head and cursor position and all the stuff that other people are doing simultaneously on stuff. We are the exact opposite of that on the QnA Maker GUI. 2 people, they're 2 separate web clients. 2 people can be on it at the same time, but you always are. There's no like locking. There's no way to like just be working on a single question. So when you hit save, you can definitely overwrite what other people are doing on their end. And so while it's technically possible to have as many clients connected at the same time, you'll never know through QnA Maker if somebody is in here right now working on this same question while you're working on it. I'm not getting live updates while they're working on it. If I hit save, it's going to go undo whatever they've worked on. And sometimes it can be a little finicky on here's, this knowledge base has paginated all the different pages, but you can kind of, if you want to look at everything all at once, you can say, hey, view all, and everything comes back in this source here where this gets really long. And so that poses some challenges. The way that we have addressed those challenges is more of a workaround than anything, but we just have a Microsoft Teams chat, and anytime somebody wants to go in and make updates, they bop the group and they say, hey, I'm making updates, and then they say, hey, I'm out. And for the frequency that we've been doing updating, it's not been that big of an interruption. I think anyone who has write permissions to the QnA Maker is all part of one group. That's how we're managing it. The question order isn't deterministic. One thing you might have noticed, repeat question wording and answer is kind of our solution to this, is here's all of the different questions that all filter into here. When we have this answer, we don't, this might not be obvious if you've never been in this knowledge base, but this is just text that's part of the answer when we have this question here. It's not something that QnA Maker has done by default. It's something that, an intentional thing that we've done. One thing, another reason why we wanted this to be the case was if somebody asked a question in the positive or negative, can I wear a mask? And I don't think we have any answers now that directly kind of have this structure or format. But if it was like, if the question is, can I wear a mask or should I not wear a mask? Those have different, those have all opposite kind of interpretations. And if our answer is no, if both of them map to an identical question and the answer right off the bat is like no or something like that, it's like, well, which phrasing got you to this answer? So I'm always worried that the mapping between questions and answers probably means that they're getting topics and information related to what they were querying, but it might be not the exact phrase that they queried. So I kind of always want to level set what the answer is with exactly what we're answering. And that way too, if these get long, they can kind of, before reading this whole thing, make the investment of, oh yeah, this does look like the question I was asking, or if this is totally off base, just scroll down and do that quickly. So we change these questions out by training and by adding alternative phrasings. But when we parse this out for the FAQ page, this is our one canonical source of that question. This is what we treat as the actual way to do that. And here we just like reject scrape out. We get, this whole thing as a string. In fact, here's, when we convert it into the markdown representation, here's what that string looks like when we get that information over the API. And I say, hey, I'm expecting the question to start with, some characters that are in between two asterisks and end with two asterisks. And I want you to consider this the question, because I don't know, part of that is determining what the actual authority of the question is. So I don't want to just, pick is diarrhea a virus necessarily, is what are the symptoms of COVID-19 when we're publishing the FAQ. If somebody asks that, it should map there, but we should be, be able to deterministically assign what the question text is. So that's how we're grabbing that out now. Yeah, this is another thing we've worked through. IDs are lossy during publish for a lot of things. So when we had looked at, let me pop open our FAQ site. This is, if we go all the way to here, this is what happens when I call that Postman route, or when I say, hey, download this entire knowledge base. This is the exact response we get back. And there's an ID here and there's an ID here. And one of the things we saw already, right, is I do diffing based on how these change every single day. I say, all right, I want to know if this answer is substantially different than the day before. And the only way I can reliably do that is based on an ID, because maybe the answer itself changed or maybe the body changed. These are all things that are legal to change. So the easiest way to do that is just say, all right, what was the, grab the ID from yesterday, grab the ID from today, then diff those two. And I think probably out of scope for today when we're talking about the knowledge base, but even that diffing of here's two markdown strings and you tell me the differences between those, we had to write a custom like npm package that does that. I couldn't find anything that organically gives us when we're looking at, here's our diff slide, and I have two strings and I want this kind of level of processing of give me the final product with, if they're bolds or lists or links, don't break those things. But let me know when things have been scratched out and added between two strings. There were some things that were similar, but none that worked with Markdown, none that kind of did that stuff. The warning call is these IDs can be pretty lossy. If you're doing a publish through the GUI, the way that publish works is just by taking literally, it just deletes the entire knowledge base and adds it back in, and these IDs just increment up. So if the bottom one here is all the way at 4713, then we'll just start over, and 4714 will be the very first ID, and we'll start over from scratch. So if you want to, if you do anything that's editing the content through the GUI, it doesn't go bulk replace the ID. But when you're talking about moving between test and production, that's when it will. And so we have a huge CLI set of things where in this same repository where we're building out the site and templating it out, we also just added a whole bunch of commands to archive the data or deploy it, or fetch data or lint the data or list changes. And we're doing some cool stuff, again, out of scope for this. I think this is all just, yeah, I should be able to do this, FAQ CLI. We'll run all of these, and then I played with Inquirer for the first time on the node end of things. And so you can kind of pick what you'd like to do. And so we can get help text, and that kind of gives us help information for all that CLI stuff. Or we can go run a command, and so I can run like list changes, and I can say, hey, here's all the stuff that's been changing. Or I can lint stuff, I can do any of these commands. Which is all to say, if you do find yourself in this problem, the method that we have for taking, I want to make some modifications here. I'm doing this on the back end. I'm doing a bulk publish. This restore operation goes in and takes, figures out what's currently live and looks at this existing FAQ and makes all of what they expect to see submitted is every single delta. So if you're changing metadata, for example, and if I change it to this, what I really need to do is submit a delete operation for this, for the old one, and submit an insert operation for the new one. Stuff like that, it gets very hairy and nuanced at every single field level. It wants exactly what changed, and that's the only way you can preserve the ID. So if you want help with that, this is kind of the script we came up with to do that. It's not trivial in terms of getting things exactly in the right structure. You need to say, here's exactly what we're adding in terms of questions, adding in terms of metadata. These all have specific shapes to them. Here's the context that we're changing if we change any of that. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing IDs. Unless you're doing diffing, IDs might not be super important to your process, but I'd always rather have them, I guess. I think, we go till 8. I think in my dry run for this demo, I think it takes about 20 minutes. I think we could go straight till 8 and do a demo of getting this stuff started, just to, if people are still interested and still want to stay on the line, we can look at that if folks would like. Because I think that, one of the things is the deployment of this is actually not super scary. So as long as I get a thumbs up from folks, it doesn't leave much time for questions, but we've had some come in throughout. So I'll get started on this, I guess. And if people want to ask questions, ask away as well. Let's say you're starting from scratch. I think this is my own personal Azure account. I don't have any resources related to this. you log into QnA Maker. You can log in. You can go to my knowledge bases, but this should be empty. I don't have any. And so there's an operation, create a knowledge base. And where this sends you to is, I don't know what the term for this is in Azure space, but they kind of template out and scaffold exactly what newing up this resource is going to be. So if I hit create QnA services, it sends me over to Azure. I get this, instantiation blade where I set all my settings for it. So we're going to create a service, and I'll call this Boston Azure Bot. The pricing tier I want for this is free. The resource group, I'm going to create a new resource group and call it Boston Azure Bot. Somebody who works for Azure is going to have to explain this to me at some point. I'm going to choose free here. If you choose East US, I have to choose East US like another dozen times. I don't understand why. As long as I said I'm in East US, just take things in East US in general. Website location still in East. App Insights location still in East US. Let's hit create. Make sure everything is fine here. This deployment process takes a moment. So deployment is underway right now. While that's underway is a great little window for questions, but I'll leave it on this screen because I'm waiting for these little bubbles to stop. So what questions do you folks have? I think this will take 5 minutes, so somewhere abouts. Certainly, I hope it does if we want to hit 8 o'clock bedtime for everyone. Based on cost, 6K, does that mean you're turning around 12,000 monthly queries into self-service questions? I guess this would increase responses that do not answer the question. Yeah, I mean, and also some of those numbers are based on the follow-up prompts that we've said. So I don't know exactly what our count is. 12,000 actually seems high. I think when I was doing that estimating for monthly, I think it's closer to like 5,000 monthly. And I think $6 was just, an armchair estimate at, what we might expect for that. We're a small state, right? So we have like 623,000 people in the entire state. And so, the volume of traffic I think is higher than I was anticipating originally, based on how much we've publicized that this exists. Yeah, but good question. Okay, so this is complete. No, yeah, totally agreed. We should refresh this down below and it will go look for your Azure subscription. And I think I have 2 like pay-as-you-go subscriptions. I'm sure I'll figure out how to delete one of them one day. And I can select the Azure QnA service, and this is the Boston Azure Bot. This role does not have permission for the section. Let's hard refresh this page. See if that does anything differently. Select subscription, pay as you go. Cool. Boston Azure Bot. We're gonna do English. And I'm just gonna, I'm a fan of just naming things, mostly the same. There might be better naming conventions. We're not gonna populate it with anything initially. There are some options for chit chat. And so, things like, are you a robot or something like that, those questions should not map to something in your knowledge base. And so I think one of the chit chat things it's trying to do is steal those questions that you might be asking, people might be asking kind of jokingly or sarcastically, or just the way that you might engage with a bot. Some people legitimately ask, am I talking to a real person? And to that, we always want to have a response that says, no, you're not talking to a real person. Like, don't give me medical info. Don't say, I'm having trouble breathing. Like, this is a bot. And so we try to make that clear in the copy going into the bot and also the responses that come out of the bot. But the chit chat is a little like snippy and a little like wisecracky, even at the professional chit chat level. But you can review what's in that file and figure out if it works for you. Let's create a knowledge base. This should provision those resources. And if you see a spinning icon, feel free to ask me a question. I could ramble some more too on stuff we've done. Okay, so I have a knowledge base. I'm guessing stuff is still loading because I thought I put in the chit chat, but let's add a QnA pair to here. We're gonna add the question itself and say like, oh, here we go. It loaded in the professional chit chat. Here's the kind of example of like all of these alternative phrasings, you know, do you ever get hurt? And it says, I don't have a body. Sometimes that's a little weird and out of context. If I ever get this response back and somebody's querying something about breathing for COVID and it says, I don't have a body, is like, we just didn't like any of these things, so we didn't deploy with professional. You can kind of use this as a starting point to be like, all right, if these questions came in, how do I want to actually respond to those? You can add a QnA pair, and let's add a QnA pair saying like, you know, oops, can I go to the store? And an answer, sure. I don't see why not. Just wear a mask. When we were talking about metadata earlier, in view options, there's show metadata, and this is where we added those category fields. Category is like shopping or something. You can put in whatever you would like in terms of that metadata. There's a couple different, so, you know, think of this as we have this asterisk here is like, this is edited, we haven't saved anything yet. If I make a change to the knowledge base, approximately how long does it take to run the regeneration process? We'll do that live right now, right? So I think, you know, it depends on the size of it, but soon. And this should be an in-place upgrade. You know, like when we're publishing this, nothing comes down. However that's being handled on the back end, I'd assume it's not dropping anything. When you save and train, within one of the other features inside of here is if I test this knowledge base out, I can say, hey, can I go to the store? And I should get the response back that we put into here. And if I don't, or I'm trying to figure out why it's not coming up correctly, there's an inspect feature, and it will tell me, you know, here that it was the exact phrasing. So the confidence score is 100, and it gives me alternative things. The confidence score is much lower, and it picks the highest confidence score. You can set a setting in the bot service to return top 3 results or top n results. If I just say store go to, I might get the same answer, but when I inspect that, its confidence score is a little bit less, right? It's not, haven't hit an exact phrasing there. And you can rank them and say, yes, I'd like you to choose this instead, or add alternative phrasings at this level. So let's, to dismiss this, you can't just click off of here, you have to close that blade. We can publish it from here, and publishing, you know, when we talk about deploying, we have our test service and our production service. Each one of those services has what's running on the knowledge base itself is technically they consider test, and publishing it makes it available on production. So Bill, to answer your question, that publish means it's on production now. So that save and train plus publish is the full life cycle to getting that question into production. Those are the 2 clicks that you have to do there. And then from here, we can create a bot, which is the last thing that we'll have to stand up specifically to get this running. So the link to that is just when you publish, it says create a bot. If you want to hit it right away, you can use Postman or use curl to go hit that API. But we want to use the bot service and the web chat framework to actually deliver stuff. So here's the next set of Azure resources we have to provision. We're going to do same bot handle is fine. Resource group is still Boston Azure bot. Location, it should just, this is my sandbox, should just say East US. We're going to go free for this. App name is fine. You can download a client in C# or Node.js, and I put a PR in for their C# client, and they accepted it. So if you download a C# client, there's a tiny bit of code that we wrote. App service plan location, app insights, and it wires up everything. I mean, when we had to change out one of the services originally, all this stuff is wired into the config values in all these services that we're provisioning. And when we had to swap one of them out, it was hairy. It was like a lot of stuff to do. So it's really helpful that it stands up all of this stuff. Here's what we have in this resource group so far. It is still working on the deployment of the bot service part of that. So as soon as this is done, we'll see it in this resource group, and I'll refresh and we can finish out the last leg of this. Questions in the meantime while that's running? If something's going to take a long time, it's definitely creating the cognitive service thing. So I think we're in the clear here, finishing by 8. Sweet. So I think we've deployed successfully. Let me refresh this view into the resource group. And I don't see it yet. Hard refresh. Okay, so it looks like this has this little icon. The type of service is web app bot. Here's what we have for the bot, and we can test it right away to say, hey, did we get all the way to here? And so something about, store info probably should return something about the store, and we should see that down here. As soon as it I think that cold boot is sometimes a little bit slower for the first client to hit something. Should get that back. Andrew said one of his favorite bots is Cherrybot for a UK football club. That's awesome. Yeah, says sure, I don't see why not, just wear a mask. So good, we've kind of proven that this is deployed and the bot framework is working, and now we want to choose where we're going to publish it to. And that the concept for that is channels. And so the channel that comes for free is web chat. And then here are all the other channels that I was talking about. There's Teams, there's a direct line channel, which is the way to configure anything onto there. A Cortana channel, Alexa, direct line speech, email, Facebook, Skype, Kik, GroupMe, Slack, Telegram, Twilio, and then direct line is your extension point into anything else. And a lot of people have put stuff on top of direct line that you can grab as a package. But let's just use web chat because that's the one that we have deployed. That's the one we demoed. From here, this is already selected, right? If I add another one, it's going to show up on this list of existing channels. If I edit this, I can see what options are configurable. I can block attachment. I can enable preview, stuff like that. Here's this embed code. So let's go launch JS Fiddle. Or just anything that can run a tiny bit of HTML. We're going to paste that in here, and the only thing we need to do is your secret here. I'm going to delete this anyway, so here's your one chance to grab my secret. And we'll put that here. And then this iframe is part of what they're just providing. This is going against webchat.botframework.com. If you use the JS, you can embed your own resources, but it goes against their iframe, and we pull it in, and now I should be able to say, go to store and get a response back. Or are you a human if we want to get some of the chit chat in here. I'm digital. In other words, I'm not human. Fair enough. So that's the whole life cycle of getting all of this stuff deployed. If you want to go customize the way that bot works, you can go grab into, I believe it's here, into build and download bot source code. And it will download a zip. That will include some of the app settings and config files that come in this configuration. But this is what we had looked at in Visual Studio here. This is essentially what it will look like when it's downloaded. This is the code it's running. It gets you started with this starter project and template, but then it's yours to own for the rest of its life cycle. So it will work out of the box, but if you want to configure it, here's what you configure and then republish it up to that service plan. That's our demo pieces. Some resources. This is the chatbot presentation. You are here. It's available at .gov.dev/slide/chatbot. And then our repo for all of this stuff is the docs for it are available at this link, and we didn't go through them in huge detail, but here's, you know, the markdown diffing library, and here's the kind of stuff. This is on NPM, you can grab it from there also, but here's some stuff to get it set up, and here's all the rejects we had to kind of figure out to get some of that diffing to work correctly. So if you just want to explore, you can do it through all of these documentations. This is really just taking every README or Markdown file we have from this repo here. I mentioned before Microsoft was really helpful in standing this up originally, and they have their own kind of GitHub README page that is available, and they walk through a lot of how to stand up a bot and a lot of ways to customize it. And a lot of this is actually kind of COVID-centric because this is something they stood up to help with the epidemic. And with that, I don't have a thank you slide. So thank you. I can definitely take any other questions. I can stick around for as long as people like, but we're close to 8. Regarding the secret you pasted in, is that visible via view source in the public-facing web app? Oh, you know what? I think it 100% is, Bill. I asked Microsoft about it, and it's not that secretive. It's really just the ID that's being used to identify it. If it is a concern of yours, I think they say it will best to delete ASAP. No, they think it's fine. The only thing that secret allows people to do is run the web chat itself. So what? Oh, this is in Firefox. The only thing you can do with that is run this. So what you are enabling someone to do is take this. You know, this is going to get deployed to your website. They can then go take this particular package and then go run it on any particular website. The way around it, if you don't want that to happen, is under channels. I don't know if we can do it on the web bot itself. If you go to add a direct line channel, one of the settings on here is enhanced authentication options, and you can add a trusted origin. So you're still going to have to publish that key because it's all happening on the client. That client has to reach out and make the handshake appropriately. But you can say only allow it to run on Vermont.gov or whatever your website is, and that'll the only in my case, I don't care if somebody takes this iframe and puts it anywhere. I want people to have the knowledge. If it runs up us up a transaction bill and it gets out of hand, we can like look at it and investigate. But the secret's only allowing them to run their put this bot framework anywhere. It's not granting them access to the knowledge base or anything like that. So if you do configure the direct line, then you can put in trusted origins to, you know, Vermont.gov, and now this will only run over that trusted origin. It has to be like a HTTP or something. But yeah, good question though. Other questions from folks? While I have the window, I just want to re-acknowledge a bunch of folks who worked on this, especially if it gets recorded and they watch it later. Then I'll get. We had a lot of folks on our team who put this together, and a lot of folks who have really, devs who have other priorities, and we've been doing the same team that's been meeting for Scrum on this also has other projects that are releasing at the same time right now that have been helping with COVID or existing work, and they've all done a bunch of like triage, which is like normally well outside the scope of their work. It's been really interesting, and it's definitely been all hands on deck at the health department, people pitching in where they can in ways that they can. And so I felt like this was a way we could help out. So this is something that, the team agreed on, but, I had suggested we take and focus some of our time doing that. So kudos to them. Kudos to our communication team for just tirelessly making edits on this thing and trying to get it up to speed and correct and accurate. It's a lot of updates, even just, as policies change and our response to this changes. Any other questions from folks?
Am I audible, Kyle?
Yeah, you are.
Hi, folks. This is Bill Wilder. Folks, please feel free to add any final questions for Kyle. I'll wrap up with a couple of quick announcements. First, a huge thank you for Kyle, and it's really great to see this. You know, we get together every couple of weeks and we nerd out on some technology. It's great to see how this is being aimed at a real global problem we have in the world, and using technology for all the highest purposes. So that's really gratifying to see, and congratulations to you and your team on you know, putting it to use in such a productive way. A couple of quick announcements on the Boston Azure side. Just a fun fact, Boston Azure has been around for more than 10 years, about 10 and a half years, and we just passed our 3,000th member on Meetup. And in this new coronavirus world, the 3,000th person is actually somebody named Chandalal, who joined from Dallas, Texas. So we didn't have a lot of out-of-town members before you know, recently, and it's really, I guess, a valuable side effect of this is we get to benefit from out-of-town speakers like Kyle and most other folks who have joined us in our virtual mode. We are working on other speakers and topics. I believe this will be the last one in July, but we have a couple of topics we're working on in August. So please stay tuned at the usual places. You go to bostonazure.org, and that has links to both the North Boston Azure and Boston Azure Meetup sites. So that could be a single point of entry. It looks like there are no final questions. So Kyle, we'll call it there. I'll thank you on behalf of Boston Azure once again, on behalf of Veronica and Jason, who are both in the background at the moment. The three of us put these sessions together, more them than me, I must admit. And thanks again, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time. Stay safe out there.
Yeah, thanks for having me.